This is a collage of different photos showing employees doing their jobs in a variety of workplaces. Clockwise from the top left, a room is filled with people at rows of desks with computers. People wearing chef outfits are around a table with cooking tools. People at a table are listening to someone writing on a board during a meeting. A room is filled with sewing machines in a row with people working at each machine. A person is working on a laptop outside. People are gathered in a circle and talking. A person wearing a construction hat and vest is using a jackhammer. Figure 7.1. What responsibilities do employees have to coworkers and to the company as well as to themselves when they are on the job? Credit clockwise from top left. Modification of Call Center 2006 by Aaron Y/Wikimedia Commons, CC by 2.0. Credit. Modification of Los Boleros by Agustin Ruiz/Flickr, CC by 2.0. Credit. Modification of Training by Corey Zanker/Flickr, CC by 4.0. Credit. Modification of Afghan Women at a Textile Factory in Kabul by Andrea Salazar/Wikimedia Commons, public domain. Credit. Modification of Gino Fino by Corey Zanker/Flickr, CC by 4.0. Credit. Modification of Group by Corey Zanker/Flickr, CC by 4.0. Credit. Modification of Doing Work by Nick Allen/Flickr, CC by 2.0. Chapter Outline. 7.1 Loyalty to the company. 7.2 Loyalty to the brand and to customers. 7.3 Contributing to a positive work atmosphere. 7.4 Financial integrity. 7.5 Criticism of the company and whistleblowing. What employers owe employees. Discuss the duties, obligations, and responsibilities managers and companies owe their employees. This chapter looks at the other side of that relationship to weigh the ethical dimensions of being a worthy employee and responsible coworker. Figure 7.1. Coworkers may express their opinions differently, for instance, agreeing or disagreeing, perhaps in very animated ways. Although we and our peers at work may not see eye to eye on every issue, we work best when we understand the need to get along and to show a degree of loyalty to our employer and each other, as well as to ourselves, our values, and our own best interests. Balancing these factors requires a concerted effort. What would you do, for example, if one of your coworkers were being bullied or harassed by another employee or a manager? Suppose a former colleague tried to recruit you to her new firm. What is the ethical action for you to take? How would you react if you learned your company's managers were behaving unethically or breaking the law? Who could you tell, and what could you expect as a result? What is the right response if a client or customer behaves badly toward you as an employee representing your firm? How do you provide good customer service and support the company brand in the face of difficult working conditions? Learning objectives. By the end of this section, you will be able to define employees' responsibilities to the company for which they work. Describe a non-compete agreement. Explain how confidentiality applies to trade secrets, intellectual property, and customer data. The relationship between employee and employer is changing, especially our understanding of commitment and loyalty. An ethical employee owes the company a good day's work and his or her best effort, whether the work is stimulating or dull. A duty of loyalty and our best effort are our primary obligations as employees, but what they mean can change. A manager who expects a 20th century concept of loyalty in the 21st century may be surprised when workers express a sense of entitlement, ask for a raise after 6 months, or leave for a new job after 12 months. This chapter will explore a wide range of issues from the perspective of what and how employees contribute to the overall success of a business enterprise. A duty of loyalty. Hard work and our best effort likely make sense as obligations we owe an employer. However, loyalty is more abstract and less easily defined. Most workers do not have employment contracts, so there may not be a specific agreement between the two parties detailing their mutual responsibilities. Instead, the common law case law of agency in each state is often the source of the rules governing an employment relationship. The usual depiction of duty in common law is the duty of loyalty, which, in all 50 states, requires that an employee refrain from acting in a manner contrary to the employer's interest. This duty creates some basic rules employees must follow on the job and provides employers with enforceable rights against employees who violate them. In general terms, the duty of loyalty means an employee is obligated to render loyal and faithful service to the employer, to act with good faith, and not to compete with, but rather to advance the employer's interests. The employee must not act in a way that benefits him or herself, or any other third party, especially when doing so would create a conflict of interest with the employer. 2. The common law of most states holds as a general rule that, without asking for and receiving the employer's consent, an employee cannot hold a second job if it would compete or conflict with the first job. Thus, although the precise boundaries of this aspect of the duty of loyalty are unclear, an employee who works in the graphic design department of a large advertising agency in all likelihood cannot moonlight on the weekend for a friend's small web design business. However, employers often grant permission for employees to work in positions that do not compete or interfere with their principal jobs. The graphic designer might work for a friend's catering business, for example, or perhaps as a wedding photographer or editor of a blog for a public interest community group. Link to learning. Moonlighting has become such a common phenomenon that the website Glassdoor now has a section reserved for such jobs. The Glassdoor website has a number of postings for different moonlighting opportunities to explore. What is clear is that it is wrong for employees to make work decisions primarily for their own personal gain, rather than doing what is in the employer's best interest. An employee might have the authority to decide which other companies the employer will do business with, for example, such as service vendors that maintain the copiers or clean the offices. What if the employee owned stock in one of those companies or had a relative who worked there? That gives him or her an incentive to encourage doing business with that particular company, whether it would be best for the employer or not. The degree to which the duty of loyalty exists is usually related to the degree of responsibility or trust an employer places in an employee. More trust equals a stronger duty. For example, when an employee has very extensive authority or access to confidential information, the duty can rise to its highest level, called a fiduciary duty, which is discussed in an earlier chapter. Differing concepts of loyalty. There is no generally agreed-upon definition of an employee's duty of loyalty to his or her employer. One indicator that our understanding of the term is changing is that millennials are 3 times more likely than older generations to change jobs, according to a Forbes Human Resources Council survey, Figure 7. 2. 3 About 9 in 10 millennials, 91%, say they do not expect to stay with their current job longer than 3 years, compared with older workers who often anticipated spending 10 years or even an entire career with one employer, relying on an implicit social contract between employer and employee that rewarded lifetime employment. This graphic has a circle on the left with 3 lines branching off from it to the right. In the circle is the word millennials. The first line to the right says 3 times more likely to change jobs. The second line says 90% change jobs within first 3 years. The last line says 4 different jobs in the first 10 years, by age 32. Figure 7. 2. The data on millennials and job mobility indicate that millennials are more likely to job hop than their predecessors. Attribution. Copyright Rice University, OpenStax, under CC by 4. 0 license. The Loyalty Research Center, a consulting firm, defines loyal employees as being committed to the success of the organization. They believe that working for this organization is their best option. And loyal employees do not actively search for alternative employment and are not responsive to offers. 4. Likewise, Wharton School, University of Pennsylvania, Professor Matthew Bidwell says there are two halves to the term. One piece is having the employer's best interests at heart. The other piece is remaining with the same employer rather than moving on. Bidwell goes on to acknowledge, there is less a sense that your organization is going to look after you in the way that it used to, which would lead us to expect a reduction in loyalty. 5. Why are employees less likely to feel a duty of loyalty to their companies? One reason is that loyalty is a two-way street, a feeling developed through the enactment of mutual obligations and responsibilities. However, most employers do not want to be obligated to their workers in a legal sense. They usually require that almost all workers are employees, at will, that is, without any long-term employment contract. Neither state nor federal law mandates an employment contract. So when a company says an employee is employed at will, it is sending a message that management is not making a long-term commitment to the employee. Employees may naturally feel less loyalty to an organization from which they believe they can be let go at any time, and for any legal reason, which is essentially what at-will employment means. Of course, at-will employment also means the employee can also quit at any time. However, freedom to move is a benefit only if the employee has mobility and a skill set he or she can sell to the highest bidder. Otherwise, for most workers, at-will employment usually works to the employer's advantage, not the employee's. Another reason the concept of loyalty to an organization seems to be changing at all levels is the important role money plays in career decisions. When they see chief executive officers, CEOs, and other managers leaving to work for the highest bidder, subordinates quickly conclude that they, too, ought to look out for themselves, just as their bosses do, rather than trying to build up seniority with the company. Switching jobs can often be a way for employees to improve their salaries. Consider professional sports. For decades, professional athletes were tied to one team and could not sell their services to the highest bidder, meaning that their salaries were effectively capped. Finally, after several court decisions, including the Curt Flood Reserve Clause case involving the St. Louis Cardinals and Major League Baseball, 6 players achieved some degree of freedom and can now switch employers frequently in an effort to maximize their earning potential. The same evolution occurred in the entertainment industry. In the early years of the movie business, actors were tied to studios by contracts that prevented them from making movies for any other studio, effectively limiting their earning power. Then the entertainment industry changed, as actors gained the freedom to sell their services to the highest bidder, becoming much more highly compensated in the process. Employees in any industry, not just sports and entertainment, benefit from being able to change jobs if their salary at their current job stagnates or falls below the market rate. Another economic phenomenon affecting loyalty in the private sector was the switch from defined benefit to defined contribution retirement plans. In the former, often called a pension, employee benefits are usually sponsored, paid, fully by the employer and calculated using a formula based on length of employment, salary history, and other factors. The employer administers the plan and manages the investment risk, promising the employee a set payout upon retirement. In the defined contribution plan, however, the employee invests a certain percentage of his or her salary in a retirement fund, often a 401(k) or 403(b) plan, where it is sometimes matched partially or wholly by the employer. These savings plans, with their seemingly strange designations, are part of the U.S. Internal Revenue Code, and the letter-number combinations indicate subsections of the code. 401(k) plans typically are featured in for-profit employment settings and 403(b) plans in nonprofit environments. Defined benefit plans reward longevity in the firm, whereas defined contribution plans reward high earnings over seniority. Thus, with the growth of defined contribution plans, some reasons for staying with the same employer over time are no longer applicable. According to PayScale's Compensation Best Practices report, the two leading motivators people give for leaving their job are first, higher pay, and second, personal reasons e.g., family, health, marriage, spousal relocation. 7. Of course, beyond money, workers seek meaning in their work, and it is largely true that money alone does not motivate employees to higher performance. However, it is a mistake for managers to think money is not a central factor influencing employees' job satisfaction. Money matters because if employees are not making enough money to meet their financial obligations or goals, they will likely be looking for a higher paying job. And of course, increasing salary or other benefits can be a way of demonstrating both the company's loyalty to its employees and the role it believes employees' best interests play in its mission, navigating the aforementioned two-way street. For some employees, simply being acknowledged and thanked for their service and good work can go a long way towards sparking their loyalty. For others, more concrete rewards may be necessary. Finally, many people work for themselves as freelance or contract workers in the new gig economy. They may take assignments from one or more companies at a time and are not employees in the traditional sense of the word. Therefore, it seems more reasonable that they would approach work in the same way a certified public accountant or attorney would, as completing a professional job for a client, after which they move on the next client, always keeping their independent status. We would not expect gig workers to demonstrate employer loyalty when they are not employees. What would you do? The ties that bind. If building employee loyalty is a challenge for managers and they see their workers leaving for better opportunities, what can they do to change the situation? Some companies focus on team-building activities, company picnics, rock climbing walls, or zip lines. But do these actually make workers decide to stay with their company for less salary? The answer is usually no. The reality is that salary plays an important role in an employee's decision to move to a new job. Therefore, retention bonuses are a popular and perhaps more successful technique for instilling loyalty. The company provides a payment to an employee contingent on his or her committing to remain at the company for a specific period. According to a Glassdoor study, when changing jobs, employees earn an average increase of more than 5% in salary alone, not including benefits. Thus, the offer of a salary increase or a retention or performance bonus can help turn many would-be former employees into newly loyal ones. The same study found that a 10% increase in pay upped the odds that an employee would stay at the company. According to Dr. Andrew Chamberlain, chief economist of Glassdoor, while it is important to provide upward career paths for workers, a simple job title promotion may not be enough. Maintaining competitive pay is an important part of reducing turnover. 9. Of course, a retention bonus may not be enough to keep someone at a job he or she hates, but it might help someone who likes the job to decide to stay. The Society for Human Resource Management believes retention plans should be part of an overall pay strategy, not merely giveaways for tenure. 10. Imagine that your colleague is considering leaving your firm for another company. Your manager has offered him a retention bonus to stay, and your colleague is seeking your advice about what to do. What would you advise? Critical thinking. What questions would you ask your colleague to better determine the advice you should give him or her? Consider your summer jobs, part-time employment, work-study hours on campus, and internships. What meant more to you, the salary you made or the extent to which you were treated as a real contributor and not just a line on a payroll ledger? Or a combination of both? What lessons do you now draw about reciprocal loyalty between companies and their workers? Confidentiality. In the competitive world of business, many employees encounter information in their day-to-day work that their employers reasonably expect they will keep confidential. Proprietary, private information, the details of patents and copyrights, employee records and salary histories, and customer-related data are valued company assets that must remain in-house, not in the hands of competitors, trade publications, or the news media. Employers are well within their rights to expect employees to honor their duty of confidentiality and maintain the secrecy of such proprietary material. Sometimes the duty of confidentiality originates specifically from an employment contract, if there is one, and if not, the duty still exists in most situations under the common law of agency. Most companies do not consider U.S. common law on confidentiality sufficient protection, so they often adopt employment agreements or contracts with employees that set forth the conditions of confidentiality. Note that such contracts define a one-way obligation from the employee to the employer, so they do not protect the at-will employee from being terminated without cause. Typically, an employment agreement will list a variety of requirements. For example, although in most situations the law would already hold that the employer owns copyrightable works created by employees within the scope of their employment, known as works for hire, a contract usually also contains a specific clause stating that the company owns any and all such works and assigning ownership of them to the company. The agreement will also contain a patent assignment provision, stating that all inventions created within the scope of employment are owned by or assigned to the company. Link to learning. If one day you might be a freelancer, gig worker, or contractor, watch this video showing how a non-disclosure agreement can help you protect your ideas to learn more. Employers also want to protect their trade secrets. That is, information that has economic value because it is not generally known to the public and is kept secret by reasonable means. Trade secrets might include technical or design information, advertising and marketing plans, and research and development data that would be useful to competitors. Often non-disclosure agreements are used to protect against the theft of all such information, most of which is normally protected only by the company's requirement of secrecy, not by federal intellectual property law. Federal law generally protects registered trademarks, commercial identifications such as words, designs, logos, slogans, symbols, and trade dress, which is product appearance or packaging, and grants creators copyrights to protect original literary and artistic expressions such as books, paintings, music, records, plays, movies, and software and patents to protect new and useful inventions and configurations of useful articles. Figure 7. 3. This graphic shows words related to copyright. The words copyright, registered trademark, and patent are larger than the rest. The words common law protections, patent pending, statutory protections, proprietary information, trade secret, and intellectual property are also in the graphic. Figure 7.3. Registered trademarks and content covered by patents and copyrights are protected by law, but trade secrets have no official status, and so do not enjoy the same level of federal protection. Thus, companies generally protect trade secrets internally, usually with employment agreements or contracts. Attribution. Copyright Rice University, OpenStax, under CC by 40 license. U.S. Companies have long used non-compete agreements as a way to provide another layer of confidentiality, ensuring that employees with access to sensitive information will not compete with the company during or for some period after their employment there. The stated purpose of such agreements is to protect the company's intellectual property, which is the manifestation of original ideas protected by legal means such as patent, copyright, or trademark. To be enforceable, non-compete agreements are usually limited by time and distance, i.e., they are in effect for a certain number of months or years and within a certain radius of the employer's operations. However, some companies have begun requiring these agreements even from mid- and lower-level workers, in an attempt to prevent them from changing jobs, including those who have no access to any confidential intellectual property. About 20% of the U.S. private sector workforce, and about 1 in 6 people in jobs earning less than $40,000 a year, are now covered by non-compete agreements. 11. The increased use of such agreements has left many employees feeling trapped by their limited mobility. Linked to learning. A template for a typical non-compete agreement can be found at PandaDoc. An ethical question arises regarding whether this practice is in the best interests of society and its workers, and some states are responding. California enacted a law in 2017 saying that most non-compete agreements are void, holding that although an employee may owe the employer a responsibility not to compete while employed, that duty ceases upon termination of employment. 12. In other words, an employee does not belong to a company forever. In California, therefore, a non-compete arrangement that limits employment after leaving the employer is now unenforceable. Does this law reflect the approach that most states will now take? A California company may still legally prohibit its employees from moonlighting during the term of their employment, particularly for a competitor. Cases from the real world. Non-compete agreements. After an investigation by then New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, fast food franchisor Jimmy John's announced in 2016 that it would not enforce non-compete agreements signed by low-wage employees that prohibited them from working at other sandwich shops, and it agreed to stop using the agreements in the future. Jimmy John's non-compete agreement had prohibited all workers, regardless of position, from working during their employment, and for 2 years after at any other business that sold submarine, hero type, deli style, pita, and/or wrapped or rolled sandwiches in a geographic area within 2 miles of any Jimmy John's shop anywhere in the United States. 13. Schneiderman said of the agreements, they limit mobility and opportunity for vulnerable workers and bully them into staying with the threat of being sued. Illinois Attorney General Lisa Madigan had also initiated action, filing a lawsuit that asked the court to strike down such clauses. Preventing employees from seeking employment with a competitor is unfair to Illinois workers and bad for Illinois businesses, Madigan said. By locking low-wage workers into their jobs and prohibiting them from seeking better-paying jobs elsewhere, the companies have no reason to increase their wages or benefits. 14. Jimmy John's has more than 2,500 franchises in 46 states, so its agreement meant it would be difficult for a former worker to get a job in a sandwich shop in almost any big city in the United States. Critical thinking. Other than being punitive, what purpose do non-compete agreements serve when low-level employees are required to sign them? Suppose an executive chef or vice president of marketing or operations at Jimmy John's or any large sandwich franchise leaves the firm with knowledge of trade secrets and competitive strategies. Should he or she be compelled to wait a negotiated period of time before working for a competitor? Why or why not? What is fair to all parties when high-level managers possess unique, sensitive information about their former employer? Employers may also insert a non-solicitation clause, which protects a business from an employee who leaves for another job and then attempts to lure customers or former colleagues into following. Though these clauses have limitations, they can be effective tools to protect an employer's interest in retaining its employees and customers. However, they are particularly difficult for employees to comply with in relatively closed markets. Sample language for all the clauses we have discussed is found in Figure 7, for this graphic shows 3 boxes. The first one is titled Non-Compete Clause. It says, the employee agrees that for a period of 1 year after the employee no longer works for the company, the employee will not engage in the same or similar activities as were performed for the company in any business within a 100-mile radius of the company. The second one is titled Non-Solicitation of Customers' Employees Clause. It says, The employee agrees that for a period of 2 years after the employee no longer works for the company, the employee will not solicit customer, clients, and/or employees of the company. The third one is titled Confidentiality Non-Disclosure Clause. It says, employee agrees that during employment with the company and following the termination of such employment for an unlimited term, the employee shall not misappropriate, divulge, disclose, or make use of any confidential information, intellectual property, or trade secrets. Figure 7. Four common clauses found in employment contracts include those restricting competition and solicitation upon termination of the contract, as well as requiring confidentiality during and after employment. Attribution. Copyright Rice University, OpenStax, under CC BY 40 license. A final clause an employee might be required to sign is a non-disparagement clause, which prohibits defaming or deliberately running down the reputation of the former employer. Learning objectives. By the end of this section, you will be able to describe how employees help build and sustain a brand. Discuss how employees, customer service can help or hurt a business. A good employment relationship is beneficial to both management and employees. When a company's products or services are legitimate and safe, and its employment policies are fair and compassionate, managers should be able to rely on their employees' dedication to those products or services and to their customers. Although no employee should be called upon to lie or cover up a misstep on the part of the firm, every employee should be willing to make a sincere commitment to an ethical employer. Respecting the brand. Every company puts time, effort, and money into developing a brand. That is, a product or service marketed by a particular company under a particular name. As Apple, Coca-Cola, Amazon, BMW, McDonald's, and creators of other coveted brands know, branding, creating, differentiating, and maintaining a brand's image or reputation, is an important way to build company value, sell products and services, and expand corporate goodwill. In the sense discussed here, the term brand encompasses an image, reputation, logo, tagline, or specific color scheme that is trademarked, meaning the company owns it and must give permission to others who would legally use it, such as Tiffany's unique shade of blue. Companies want and expect employees to help in their branding endeavors. For example, according to the head of training at American Express, the company's brand is its product, and its mantra has always been, "Happy employees make happy customers." 15 American Express places significant emphasis on employee satisfaction because it is convinced this strategy helps protect and advance its brand. One company that uses positive employee involvement in branding is the technology conglomerate Cisco, which started a branding program on social media that reaches out to employees, Figure 7. 5. Employees are encouraged to be creative in their brand-boosting posts in the program. The benefit is that prospective job candidates get a peek into Cisco life, and current employees feel the company trusts and values their ideas. 16. The image shows 7 women smiling. The one in the center is wearing a shirt that says Customer Success. Figure 7. 5. These Cisco employees, part of a newly formed virtual customer success team in India, help promote the brand and perhaps promote change as well. Women have been underrepresented in STEM careers, science, technology, engineering, math, and this group takes pride in the fact that they are part of a gender-balanced team. This photo was submitted as part of the annual We Are Cisco Love Where You Work contest, with the hashtag #WomenInTech and the photo caption, "Sorry, we're busy making a difference." Credit. Modification of work by Shajana Ravi Cisco, CC BY 40, used with the permission of https, thenetwork, cisco.com. Link to learning. Watch this video explaining the concept of brand loyalty to learn more. However, protecting the brand can be a special challenge today. thanks to the ease with which customers and even employees can post negative information about the brand on the internet and social media. Consider these examples in the fast food industry. A photo posted on Taco Bell's Facebook page showed an employee licking a row of tacos. A Domino's pizza employee can be seen in a YouTube video spitting on food, putting cheese into his nose, and then putting that cheese into a sandwich, and rubbing a sponge used for dishwashing on his groin area. 17 on Twitter, a Burger King employee in Japan posted a photo of himself lying on hamburger buns while on duty. The companies all responded swiftly. A Taco Bell spokesperson said the food was not served to customers, and the employee in the photo was fired. The two Domino's employees behind the videos were fired and faced felony charges and a civil lawsuit. Domino's said the tainted food was never delivered. According to a Burger King news release, the buns in the photo were waste material because of an ordering mistake and were promptly discarded after the photo was taken. The employee in the photo was fired. These examples demonstrate how much damage disloyal or disgruntled employees can create, especially on social media. All three companies experienced financial and goodwill losses after the incidents and struggled to restore public trust in their products. The immediate and long-term costs of such incidents are the reason companies invest in developing brand loyalty among their employees. According to a Harvard Business Review interview with Colin Mitchell, Global Vice President, McDonald's brand, McDonald's, good branding requires that a business think of marketing not just to its customers, but also to its employees, because they are the very people who can make the brand come alive for your customers. 18. The process of getting employees to believe in the product, to commit to the idea that the company is selling something worth buying, and even to think about buying it, is called internal marketing. Of course, some employees may not want to be the equivalent of a company spokesperson. Is it reasonable to expect an employee to be a kind of roving ambassador for the company, even when off the clock and interacting with friends and neighbors? Suppose employers offer employees substantial discounts on their products or services. Is this an equitable way to sustain reciprocal loyalty between managers and workers? Why or why not? Internal marketing is an important part of the solution to the problem of employees who act as if they do not care about the company. It helps employees make a personal connection to the products and services the business sells, without which they might be more likely to undermine the company's expectations, as in the three fast food examples cited in this section. In those cases, it is clear the employees did not believe in the brand and felt hostile toward the company. The most common problem is usually not as extreme. More often it is a lack of effort or slacking on the job. Employees are more likely to develop some degree of brand loyalty when they share a common sense of purpose and identity with the company. Link to learning. The Working Advantage website offers corporate discounts to check out. Companies sometimes offer employees significant discounts to encourage them to buy and support their products. Obligations to customers. As the public's first point of contact with a company, employees are obliged to assist the firm in forming a positive relationship with customers. How well or poorly they do so contributes a great deal to customers' impression of the company. And customers' perceptions affect not only the company but all the employees who depend on its success for their livelihood. Thus, the ethical obligations of an employee also extend to interactions with customers, whom they should treat with respect. Employers can encourage positive behavior toward customers by empowering employees to use their best judgment when working with them. Link to learning. Watch this video giving a light-hearted take on bad customer service to learn more. It may take only one bad customer interaction with a less than engaged or committed employee to sour brand loyalty, no matter how hard a company has worked to build it. In the same way, just one good experience can build up goodwill. Cases from the real world. Redefining customers. Sometimes engaged employees go above and beyond in the interest of customer service, even if they have no customers to speak of. Kathy Fryman is one such employee. Fryman was a custodian for 3 decades at a 100-year-old school in the Augusta, KY, Independent School District. She was not just taking care of the school building, she was also taking care of the people inside. 19. Fryman fixed doors that would not close, phones that would not ring, and alarms that did not sound when they should. She kept track of keys and swept up dirty floors before parents' night. That was all part of the job of custodian, but she did much more. Fryman would often ask the nurse how an ill student was doing. She would check with a teacher about a kid who was going through tough times at home. If a teacher mentioned needing something, the next day it would show up on his or her desk. A student who needed something for class would suddenly find it in his or her backpack. Speaking of Fryman, District Superintendent Lisa McCrane said, "She just has a unique way of making others feel nurtured, comforted, and cared for." According to Fryman, "I need to be doing something for somebody." Fryman's customers were not there to buy a product on which she would make a commission. Her customers were students and teachers, parents and taxpayers. Yet she provided the kind of service that all employers would be proud of, the kind that makes a difference to people every day. Critical thinking. Is there a way for a manager to find, develop, and encourage the next Fryman? Or is the desire to do something good for somebody an inherent trait in some employees that is missing in others? What is the appropriate means to reward a worker with Fryman's level of commitment? Her salary was fixed by school district pay schedules. Should she have been given an extra stipend for service above and beyond the expected? Additional time off with pay. Some other reward. Employees who display Fryman's zeal often do so for their own internal rewards. Others may simply want to be recognized and appreciated for their effort. If you were the superintendent in her district, how would you recognize Fryman? Could she, for example, be invited to speak to new hires about opportunities to render exceptional service? Employees who treat customers well are assets to the company and deserve to be treated as such. Sometimes, however, customers are rude or disrespectful, creating a challenge for an employee who wants to do a good job. This problem is best addressed by management and the employee working together. In the Pizza Hut case that follows, an employee was placed in a bad situation by customers. Cases from the real world. Is the customer always right? At an independently owned Pizza Hut franchise in Oklahoma, 22 regular customers made sexually offensive remarks to a female employee named Lockard, who then told her boss she did not like waiting on them. One evening, these customers again entered the restaurant, and her boss instructed Lockard to wait on them. She did, but this time the customers became physically abusive. Although it is the employee's duty to provide good customer service, that does not mean accepting harassment. Lockard sued her employer, the owner of the franchise, for failing to take her complaints seriously and for making her continue to suffer sexual harassment and assault by customers. The jury ruled in her favor, awarding her $360,000, and an appeals court upheld the judgment. Critical thinking. Clearly, no employee should expect to be physically assaulted, but how far should an employee be expected to go in the name of customer service? Is taking verbal taunts expected? Why or why not? Just as every employee should treat customers and clients with respect, so every employer is ethically, and often legally, obligated to safeguard employees on the job. This includes establishing a workplace atmosphere that is safe and secure for workers. If you were the owner of this Pizza Hut franchise, what protections might you put in place for your employees? Learning objectives. By the end of this section, you will be able to explain employees' responsibility to treat their peers with respect, describe employees' duty to follow company policy and the code of conduct, discuss types of workplace violence. You may spend more time with your coworkers than you spend with anyone else, including your family and friends. Thus, your ability to get along with work colleagues can have a significant impact on your life, as well as your attitude toward your job and your employer. All sorts of personalities populate our workplaces, but regardless of their working style, preferences, or quirks, employees owe one another courtesy and respect. That does not mean always agreeing with them, because evaluating a diversity of perspectives on business problems and opportunities is often essential for finding solutions. At the same time, however, we are responsible for limiting our arguments to principles, not personalities. This is what we owe to one another as human beings, as well as to the firm, so worksite arguments do not inflict lasting harm on the people who work there or on the company itself. Getting along with coworkers. An employee who gets along with coworkers can help the company perform better. What can employees do to help create a more harmonious workplace with a positive atmosphere? One thing you can do is to keep an open mind. You may be wondering as you start a new job whether you will get along with your colleagues as well as you did at your old job. Or if you did not get along with the people there and were looking for a change, you might fear things will be the same at the new job. Do not make any prejudgments. Get to know a bit about your new coworkers. Accept or extend lunch invitations, join weekend activities and office social events, and perhaps join those office traditions that bind long-serving employees and newcomers together in a collaborative spirit. Another thing you can do is to remember to be kind. Everyone has a bad day every now and then, and if you spot a coworker having one, performing a random act of kindness may make that person's day better. You do not need to be extravagant. Offer to stay late to help the person meet a tight deadline, or bring coffee or a healthy snack to someone working on particularly difficult tasks. Remember the adage, it's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice. For any relationship to succeed, including the relationship between coworkers, the parties must respect each other and show it. Avoid doing things that might offend others. For example, do not take credit for someone else's work. Do not be narrow-minded. When someone brings up a topic such as politics or religion, be willing to listen and tolerate differing points of view. A related directive is to avoid sexual jokes, stories, anecdotes, and innuendos. You might think it is okay to talk about anything and everything at work, but it is not. Others may not find the topic funny and feel offended, and you may make yourself vulnerable to action by management if such behavior is reported. Your coworkers might be a captive audience, but you should never place them in an awkward position. Make an effort to get along with everyone, even difficult people. You did not choose your coworkers, and some may be hard to get along with. But professionalism requires that we attempt to establish the best working relationships we can on the job, no matter the opinions we might have about our colleagues. Normally, we might like some of them very much, be neutral about some others, and genuinely dislike still others. Yet our responsibility in the workplace is to respect and act at least civilly toward all of them. We likely will feel better about ourselves as professionals and also live up to our commitments to our companies. Finally, do not use social media to gossip. Gossiping at work can cause problems anywhere, perhaps especially on social media, so resist the urge to vent online about your coworkers. It makes you appear petty, small, and untrustworthy, and colleagues may stop communicating with you. You may also run afoul of your employer's social media policy and risk disciplinary action or dismissal. Understanding personalities. Understanding the various personalities at work can be a complex task, but it is a vital one for developing a sense of collegiality. One technique that may be helpful is to develop your own emotional intelligence, which is the capacity to recognize other people's emotions and also to know and manage your own. One aspect of using emotional intelligence is showing empathy, the willingness to step into someone else's shoes. Linked to learning. Do you think you know yourself? Take this free online personality test from IDR Labs. It may tell you something you did not know that you can use to your benefit at work. All of us have different workplace personalities, which express the way we think and act on the job. There are many such personalities, and none is superior or inferior to another, but they are a way in which we exhibit our uniqueness on the job, figure 7-6. Some of us lead with our brains and emphasize logic and reason. Others lead with our hearts, always emphasizing mercy over justice in our relationships with others. The image shows Lego figureheads stacked in 5 columns, with 4 heads in each column. The heads show a variety of expressions. Figure 7-6. Which type of personality are you? Credit: Jackson Sestic/Flickr, CC by 40. Employees can also have very different work styles, the way in which we are most comfortable accomplishing our tasks at work. Some of us gravitate toward independence and jobs or tasks we can accomplish alone. Others prefer team or project work, bringing us into touch with different personalities. Still others seek a mix of these environments. Some prioritize getting the job done as efficiently as possible, whereas others value the journey of working on the project with others and the shared experiences it brings. There is no right or wrong style, but it benefits any worker to know his or her preferences and something about the work personalities of colleagues. When in the office, the point for any of us individually is to appreciate what motivates our greatest success and happiness on the job. What would you do? Personality test. Imagine you are a department director with 25 employees reporting directly to you. 2 of them are experts in their fields. You like and respect them individually, as do the others in your department, but they simply cannot get along with each other and so never work together. How do you resolve this personality clash? You cannot simply insist that the 2 colleagues cooperate, because personalities do not change. Still, you have to do your best to establish an atmosphere in which they can least collaborate civilly. Even though managers have no power to change human nature or the personality conflicts that inevitably occur, part of their responsibility is to establish a harmonious working environment, and others will judge you on the harmony you cultivate in your department. Critical thinking. Working relationships are extremely important to an employee's job satisfaction. What options would you use to foster a cooperative working relationship in your department? Reducing workplace violence. As recent incidents have shown, for example, the April 2018 shooting at YouTube headquarters in San Bruno, California 21, workplace violence is a reality, and all employees play a role in helping make work a safe, as well as harmonious place. Employees, in fact, have a legal and ethical duty not to be violent at work, and managers have a duty to prevent or stop violence. The National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health reports that violence at work usually fits into one of 4 categories: traditional criminal intent, violence by one worker against another, violence stemming from a personal relationship, and violence by a customer. 22. In violence based on traditional criminal intent, the perpetrator has no legitimate relationship to the business or its employees, and often the violence is part of a crime such as robbery or shoplifting. Violence between coworkers occurs when a current or former employee attacks another employee in the workplace. Worker-on-worker deaths account for approximately 15% of all workplace homicides. All companies are at risk for this type of violence, and contributing factors include failure to conduct a criminal background check as part of the hiring process. When the violence arises from problems in a personal relationship, the perpetrator often has a direct relationship not with the business but with the victim, who is an employee. This category of violence accounts for slightly less than 10% of all workplace homicides. Women are at higher risk of being victims of this type of violence than men. In the 4th scenario, the violent person has a legitimate relationship with the business, perhaps as a customer or patient, and becomes violent while on the premises. A large portion of customer incidents occur in the nightclub, restaurant, and healthcare industries. In 2014, About one-fifth of all workplace homicides resulted from this type of violence. 23. Codes of conduct. Companies have a right to insist that their employees, including managers, engage in ethical decision-making. To help achieve this goal, most businesses provide a written code of ethics or code of conduct for all employees to follow. These cover a wide variety of topics, from workplace romance and sexual harassment to hiring and termination policies, client and customer entertainment, bribery and gifts, personal trading of company shares in any way that hints of acting on insider knowledge of the company's fortunes, outside employment, and dozens of others. A typical code of conduct, regardless of the company or the industry, will also contain a variety of standard clauses, often blending legal compliance and ethical considerations. Table 7.1. Sample Code of Conduct. Compliance with all laws. Employees must comply with all laws, including bribery, fraud, securities, environmental safety, and employment laws. Corruption and fraud. Employees must not accept certain types of gifts and hospitality from clients, vendors, or partners. Bribery is prohibited in all circumstances. Conflict of interest. Employees must disclose and/or avoid any personal, financial, or other interests that might influence their ability to perform their job duties. Company property. Employees must treat the company's property with respect and care, not misuse it, and protect company facilities and other material property. Cybersecurity and digital devices policy. Employees must not use company computer equipment to transfer illegal, offensive, or pirated material, or to visit potentially dangerous websites that might compromise the safety of the company network or servers. Employees must respect their duty of confidentiality in all internet interactions. Social media policy. Employees may or may not access personal social media accounts at work, but are expected to act responsibly, follow company policies, and maintain productivity. Sexual harassment. Employees must not engage in unwelcome or unwanted sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature. Behaviors such as conditioning promotions, awards, training, or other job benefits upon acceptance of unwelcome actions of a sexual nature are always wrong. 24. Workplace respect. Employees must show respect for their colleagues at every level. Neither inappropriate nor illegal behavior will be tolerated. Table 7.1. Link to learning. ExxonMobil's code of conduct is typical of that of most large companies. Read ExxonMobil's code of conduct on their website, and note that it demands ethical conduct at every level of the organization. Exxon expects its leadership team to model appropriate behavior for all employees. Decide whether, if you were an Exxon employee, you would find the code understandable and clear regarding what is allowed and what is not. Still thinking as an employee, identify the section of the code you think is most important for you and explain why. Two areas that deserve special mention are cybersecurity and harassment. Recent news stories have highlighted the hacking of electronic tools such as computers and databases, and employees and managers can indirectly contribute to such data breaches through unauthorized web surfing, sloppy email usage, and other careless actions. Large companies such as Equifax, LinkedIn, Sony, Facebook, and J.P. Morgan Chase have suffered the theft of customer information, leading to loss of consumer confidence. Sometimes large fines have been levied on companies. Employees play a part in preventing such breaches by strictly following company guidelines about data privacy and confidentiality, the use and storage of passwords, and other safeguards that limit access to only authorized users. Link to learning. For more on recent data breaches, watch a couple of videos. Watch this video about how J.P. Morgan Chase's $13 billion fine was the largest in history from CBS Evening News. Also watch this video about how the Sony PlayStation was hacked and data was stolen from 77 million users from CBS early. We are also witnessing an increased level of public awareness about harassment in the workplace, particularly because of the Me Too movement that followed revelations in 2017 and 2018 of years of sexual predation by powerful men in Hollywood and Washington, D.C., as well as across workplaces of all kinds, including in sports and the arts. A victim of sexual harassment can be a man or a woman, and or the same sex as the harasser. The harasser can be a supervisor, coworker, other employee, officer, director, intern, consultant, or non-employee. Whatever the situation, harassing and threatening behavior is wrong and sometimes criminal, and should always be reported. Learning objectives. By the end of this section, you will be able to describe an employee's responsibilities to the employer in financial matters, define insider trading, discuss bribery and its legal and ethical consequences. Employees may face ethical dilemmas in the area of finance, especially in situations such as bribery and insider trading in securities. Such dubious profit opportunities can offer the chance of realizing thousands or millions of dollars, creating serious temptation for an employee. However, insider trading and bribery are serious violations of the law that can result in incarceration and large fines. Insider trading, the buying or selling of stocks, bonds, or other investments based on non-public information that is likely to affect the price of the security being traded, is called insider trading. For example, someone who is privy to information that a company is about to be taken over, which will cause its stock price to rise when the information becomes public, may buy the stock before it goes up in order to sell it later for an enhanced profit. Likewise, someone with inside information about a coming drop in share price may sell all his or her holdings at the current price before the information is announced, avoiding the loss other shareholders will suffer when the price falls. Although insider trading can be difficult to prove, it is essentially cheating. It is illegal, unethical, and unfair, and it often injures other investors, as well as undermining public confidence in the stock market. Insider trading laws are somewhat complex. They have developed through federal court interpretations of Section 10(b) 5 of the Securities Exchange Act of 1934, as well as through actions by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. The laws identify several kinds of violations. These include trading by an insider, generally someone who performs work for the company, who possesses significant confidential information relevant to the valuation of the company's stock, and trading by someone outside of the company who is given this sort of information by an insider or who obtains it inappropriately. Even being the messenger, the one communicating material non-public information to others on behalf of someone else, can be a legal violation. The concept of an insider is broad and includes officers, directors, and employees of a company issuing securities. A person can even constitute what is called a temporary insider, if he or she temporarily assumes a unique confidential relationship with a firm, and in doing so, acquires confidential information centered on the firm's financial and operational affairs. Temporary insiders can be investment bankers, brokers, attorneys, accountants, or other professionals typically thought of as outsiders, such as newspaper and television reporters. A famous case of insider trading, Securities and Exchange Commission v. Texas Gulf Sulphur Co., 1968, began with the discovery of the Kidd Mine and implicated the employees of Texas Mining Company. 25, when first notified of the discovery of a large and very valuable copper deposit, mine employees bought stock in the company while keeping the information secret. When the information was released to the public, the price of the stock went up and the employees sold their stock, making a significant amount of money. The SEC and the Department of Justice prosecuted the employees for insider trading and won a conviction. The employees had to give back all the money they had made on their trades. Insider trading cases are often highly publicized, especially when charges are brought against high-profile figures. Ethics across time and cultures. Insider trading and fiduciary duty. One of the most famous cases of insider trading implicated Michael Milken, Dennis Levine, and Martin Siegel, all executives of Drexel Burnham Lambert DBL, and the company itself. 26 Ivan Boesky, also accused, was an arbitrageur, an outside investor who bet on corporate takeovers and appeared to be able to uncannily anticipate takeover targets, buy their stock ahead of time, and earn huge profits. Everyone wondered how. The answer was that he cheated. Boesky went to the source, the major investment banks, to get insider information. He paid Levine and Siegel to give him pre-takeover details, an illegal action, and he profited enormously from nearly every major deal in the merger-crazy 1980s, including huge deals involving oil companies such as Texaco, Getty, Gulf, and Chevron. The SEC started to become suspicious after receiving a tip that someone was leaking information. Investigators discovered Levine's secret Swiss bank account, with all the money Boesky had paid him. Levine then gave up Boesky in a plea deal. The SEC started watching Boesky and subsequently caught Siegel and Milken. The penalties were the most severe ever given at the time. Milken, the biggest catch of all, agreed to pay $200 million in government fines, $400 million to investors who had been hurt by his actions, and $500 million to DBL clients, for a grand total of $1 billion. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison and banned for life from any involvement in the securities industry. Boesky received a prison sentence of 5 years, was fined $100 million, and was permanently barred from working with securities. Levine agreed to pay $11, $5 million, and $2 million more in back taxes. He too was given a lifetime ban and was sentenced to 2 years in prison. Milken and Levine violated their financial duties to their employer and the company's clients. Not only does insider trading create a public relations nightmare, it also subjects the company to legal liability. DBL ended up being held liable in civil lawsuits due to the actions of its employees, and it was also charged with violations of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations (RICO) Act, and ultimately failed, going bankrupt in 1990. As a note of interest regarding the aftermath of all of this for Milken, he has tried to redeem his image since his incarceration. He resolutely advises others to avoid his criminal acts and has endowed some worthy causes in Lowe's Angels. Critical thinking. Employers in financial services must have stringent codes of professional behavior for their employees to observe. Even given such a code, how should employees honor their fiduciary duty to safeguard the firm's assets and treat clients equitably? What mechanisms would you suggest for keeping employees in banking, equities trading, and financial advising within the limits of the law and ethical behavior? This case dominated the headlines in the 1980s, and the accused in this case were all severely fined and received prison sentences. How do you think this case might be treated today? Should employees in these industries be encouraged or even required to receive ethical certification from the state or from professional associations? Why or why not? Bribery and the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Another temptation that may present itself to employees is the offer of a bribe. A bribe is a payment in some material form, cash or non-cash, for an act that runs counter to the legal or ethical culture of the work environment. Bribery constitutes a violation of the law in all 50 U.S. states, as well as of a federal law that prohibits bribery in international transactions, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Bribery generally injures not only individuals but also competitors, the government, and the free market system as a whole. Of course, often the bribe is somewhat less obvious than an envelope full of money. It is important, therefore, to understand what constitutes a bribe. Numerous factors help establish the ethics and legality of gift giving and receiving. The value of the gift, its purpose, the circumstances under which it is given, the position of the person receiving it, company policy, and the law. Assuming an employee has decision-making authority, the company wants and has the right to expect him or her to make choices in its best interest, not the employee's own self-interest. For example, assume an employee has the authority to buy a copy machine for the company. The employer wants to get the best copy machine for the best price, taking into account quality, service, warranties, and other factors. But what if the employee accepts a valuable gift card from a vendor who sells a copy machine with higher operating and maintenance charges, and then places the order with that vendor? This is clearly not in the best interests of the employer. It constitutes a failure on the part of the employee to follow ethical and legal rules, and in all likelihood, company policy as well. If a company wants its employees always to do the right thing, it must have policies and procedures that ensure the employees know what the rules are and the consequences for breaking them. A gift may be only a well-intentioned token of appreciation, but the potential for violating company rules and the law is still present. A well-written and effectively communicated gift policy provides guidance to company employees about what is and is not appropriate to accept from a customer or vendor, and when. This policy should clearly state whether employees are allowed to accept gifts on or outside the work premises, and who may give or accept them. If gifts are allowed, the gift policy should define the acceptable value and type, and the circumstances under which an employee may accept a gift. When in doubt about whether the size or value of a gift renders it impossible for an employee to accept it, workers should be advised to check with the appropriate officer or department within their company, be it an ethics hotline or simply the human resources department. Wise firms provide an easy protocol for employees to follow in determining what falls within and without the protocols for accepting gifts. As an example of a gift policy, consider the federal government's strict rules. 27. A federal employee may not give or solicit a contribution for a gift to an official superior, and may not accept a gift from an employee receiving less pay if that employee is a subordinate. On annual occasions when gifts are traditionally given, such as birthdays and holidays, an employee may give a superior a gift valued at less than $10. An employee may not solicit or accept a gift given because of his or her official position, or from a prohibited source, including anyone who has or seeks official action or business with the agency. In special circumstances such as holidays, and unless the frequency of the gifts would appear to be improper, an employee generally may accept gifts of less than $20. Gifts of entertainment, such as expensive restaurant meals, are also restricted. Finally, gifts must be reported when their total value from one source exceeds $390 in a calendar year. Some companies in the private sector follow similar rules. Bribery presents a particular ethical challenge for employees in the international business arenas. Although every company wants to land lucrative contracts around the world, most expect their employees to follow both the law and company policy when attempting to consummate such deals. The U.S. law prohibiting bribery in international business dealings is the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FCPA, which is an amendment to the Securities and Exchange Act of 1934, one of the most important laws promoting transparency in corporate governance. The FCPA dates to 1977 and was amended in 1988 and 1998. Its main purpose is to make it illegal for companies and their managers to influence or bribe foreign officials with monetary payments or rewards of any kind, in an attempt to get or keep business opportunities outside the United States. The FCPA is enforced through the joint efforts of the SEC and the Department of Justice. 28. It applies to any act by U.S. businesses, their representatives, foreign corporations whose stock is traded in U.S. markets, and all U.S. citizens, nationals, or residents acting in furtherance of a foreign corrupt practice, whether they are physically present in the United States or not. This is called the nationality principle. Anti-bribery law is a serious issue for companies with overseas business and cross-border sales. Any companies or individuals convicted of these activities may pay significant fines, and individuals can face prison time. The FCPA prohibits an agent of any company incorporated in the United States from extending a bribe to a foreign government official to achieve a business advantage in that country. But it does not specifically prohibit the extension of a bribe to a private officer of a non-governmental company in a foreign country. The definition of a foreign government official can be expansive. It includes not only those working directly for the government, but also company officials, if the company is owned or operated by the government. An exception is made for facilitating or grease payments, small amounts of money paid to low-level government workers in an effort to speed routine tasks like processing paperwork or turning on electricity, but not to influence the granting of a contract. Illegal payments need not be cash. They can include anything of value such as gifts and trips. For example, BHP Billiton, a U.S. energy company, and GlaxoSmithKline, a UK pharmaceutical company, were each fined $25 million for buying foreign officials' tickets to the 2008 Olympic Games in Beijing, China. 29 fines for violations like these can be large and can include civil penalties as well as forfeited profits. For example, Telia, a Swedish telecommunications provider whose shares are traded on Nasdaq, recently agreed to pay nearly $1 billion, $965 million, in a settlement to resolve FCPA violations that consisted of using bribery to win business in Uzbekistan. 30. Link to learning. The SEC website provides an interactive list of the SEC's FCPA enforcement actions by calendar year and company name for more information. Click on Telia to read more details on the case cited in the preceding paragraph. Do you think the penalty was too harsh or not harsh enough? Why? The potential effect of laws such as the FCPA that impose ethical duties on employees and the companies they work for is often debated. Although some believe the FCPA disadvantages U.S. firms competing in foreign markets, others say it is the backbone of an ethical free enterprise system. The argument against strong enforcement of the FCPA has some merit according to managers in the field, and there is a general sense that illegal or unethical conduct is sometimes necessary for success. An attorney for energy-related company Synergy summed up the feelings of many executives. Shame on the Justice Department's myopic view and inability to understand the realities of the world. 31. Some nations consider business bribery to be culturally acceptable and turn a blind eye to such activities. The argument in favor of FCPA enforcement has its supporters as well, who assert that the law not only covers the activities of U.S. companies but also levels the playing field because of its broad jurisdiction over foreign enterprises and their officials. The fact is that since the United States passed the FCPA, other nations have followed suit. The 1997 Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, Anti-Bribery Convention, has been instrumental in getting its signatories, the United Kingdom and most European Union nations, to enact stricter anti-bribery laws. The United Kingdom adopted the Bribery Act in 2010. Canada adopted the Corruption of Foreign Officials Act of 1999, and European Union nations have done the same. There is also the OECD Convention on Combating Bribery of Foreign Public Officials in International Business Transactions, which has 43 signatories, including all 35 OECD countries and 8 other countries. Companies and employees engaging in transactions in foreign markets face an increased level of regulatory scrutiny and are well served if they put ethics policies in place and enforce them. Companies must train employees at all levels to follow compliance guidelines and rules, rather than engaging in illegal conduct such as under-the-table and off-the-books payments. Figure 7.7. This image shows a stack of $100 bills half in a clasp envelope. Figure 7.7, under the table and off the books, are terms applied to payments that are really bribes. Credit, modification of graft for everyone. By Chris Potter/Flickr, CC by 20. Ethical leadership. Of course, bribery is just one of many ethical dilemmas an employee might face in the workplace. Not all such dilemmas are governed by the clear-cut rules generally laid out for illegal acts such as bribery. Employees may find themselves being asked to do something that is legal but not considered ethical. For example, an employee might receive confidential proprietary knowledge about another firm that would give his or her firm an unfair competitive advantage. Should the employee act on this information? What would you do? Should you act on information if you have doubts? Assume you are a partner in a successful computer consulting firm bidding for a contract with a large insurance company. Your chief rival is a firm that has usually offered services and prices similar to yours. However, from a new employee who used to work for that firm, you learn that it is unveiling a new competitive price structure and accelerated delivery dates, which will undercut the terms you had been prepared to offer the insurance company. Assume you have verified that the new employee is not in violation of any non-compete or non-disclosure agreement, and therefore the information was not given to you illegally. Critical thinking. Would you change prices and delivery dates to beat your rival, or would you inform both your rival and potential customer of what you have learned? Why? Most companies say they want all employees to obey the law and make ethical decisions. But employees typically should not be expected to make ethical decisions based just on gut instinct. They need guidance, training, and leadership to help them navigate the maze of gray areas that present themselves daily in business. This guidance can be provided by the company through standard setting and the development of ethical codes of conduct and policies. Senior managers modeling ethical behavior, and so leading by direct example, also provide significant direction. Learning objectives. By the end of this section, you will be able to outline the rules and laws that govern employees, criticism of the employer, identify situations in which an employee becomes a whistleblower. This chapter has explained the many responsibilities employees owe their employers. But workers are not robots. They have minds of their own and the freedom to criticize their bosses and firms, even if managers and companies do not always welcome such criticism. What kind of criticism is fair and ethical? What is legal? And how should a whistleblowing employee be treated? Limiting pay secrecy. For decades, most U.S. companies enforced pay secrecy, a policy that prohibits employees from disclosing or discussing salaries among themselves. The reason was obvious. Companies did not want to be scrutinized for their salary decisions. They knew that if workers were aware of what each was paid, they would question the inequities that pay secrecy kept hidden from them. Recently, the situation has begun to change. 10 states have enacted new laws banning employers from imposing pay secrecy rules. California, Colorado, Illinois, Louisiana, Maine, Michigan, Minnesota, New Hampshire, New Jersey, and Vermont. 32. The real game changer came in 2012, when multiple decisions by the National Labor Relations Board, NLRB, and various federal courts made it clear that most pay secrecy policies are unenforceable and violate federal labor law, National Labor Relations Act, 29 U.S.C. Section 157-158. 33. Generally speaking, labor law lends employees the right to engage in collective activities, including that of discussing with each other the specifics of their individual employment arrangements, which includes how much they are paid. Moreover, the applicable sections of the 1935 National Labor Relations Act, NLRA, apply to union and non-union employees, so there is no exception made for companies whose employees are non-unionized, meaning the law protects all workers. In 2014, President Barack Obama issued an executive order banning companies that engaged in federal contracting from prohibiting such salary discussions. 34. Opening up the discussion of pay acknowledges the growing desire of employees to be well informed and to have the freedom to question or criticize their company. If employees cannot talk about something at work because they think it will make their boss angry, where do they go instead? Social media can be a likely answer. Protections generally extend to salary discussions on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. Section 7 of the NRLA protects two or more employees who act together or discuss improving their terms and conditions of employment in person or online, just as it does in other settings. Speaking out on social media. Does the First Amendment protect employees at work who criticize their boss or their company? Generally, no. That answer may surprise those who believe that the First Amendment protects all speech. It does not. The Bill of Rights was created to protect citizens from an overreaching government, not from their employer. The First Amendment reads as follows: Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. The key words are, Congress shall make no law, meaning the content of speech is something the government and politicians cannot control with laws or policies. However, this right of free speech is generally not applicable to the private sector workplace and does not cover criticism of your employer. Does that mean an employee can be fired for criticizing the company or boss? Yes, under most circumstances. Therefore, if someone posts a message on social media that says, "My boss is a jerk," or "My company is a terrible place to work," the likelihood is that the person can be fired without any recourse, assuming he or she is an employee at will. See the discussion of at-will employment earlier in this chapter. Unless the act of firing constitutes a violation under federal law, such as Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the speech is not protected speech, and thus the speaker, the employee, is not protected. At some point, all of us may get angry with our companies or supervisors, but we still have a duty to keep our disputes in-house and not make public any situations we are attempting to resolve internally. Employers typically are prohibited from discussing human resource matters relating to any specific employees. Employees, too, should keep complaints confidential unless and until crimes are charged or civil suits are filed. Cases from the real world. Adrian Duane and IXL Learning. Adrian Duane had worked for IXL, a Silicon Valley educational technology company, 35, for about a year when he got into a dispute with his supervisor over Duane's ability to work flexible hours after he returned from medical leave following transgender surgery. Duane posted a critical comment on Glassdoor, after he said his supervisor refused to accommodate a scheduling request. Duane's critique said, in part, "If you're not a family-oriented white or Asian straight or mainstream gay person with 7 kids who really like softball, then you're likely to find yourself on the outside. Most management do not know what the word discrimination means, nor do they seem to think it matters." 36. According to court documents, Paul Miskin, IXL's CEO, confronted Duane with a printout of the Glassdoor review during a meeting about his complaints, at which time IXL terminated Duane. IXL claimed the derogatory post showed poor judgment and ethical values. Security had already cleared out Duane's desk and boxed his personal effects, and he was escorted from the premises. According to IXL, the company had granted Duane's requests for time off or modified work schedules and welcomes all individuals equally regardless of gender identity. The NLRB heard Duane's case. Judge Gerald M. Etchingham said he did not believe the post was part of a concerted or group action among Dwayne's fellow employees at the company, and therefore it was not protected under the NLRA, because it was not an attempt to improve collective terms and conditions of employment. Furthermore, Etchingham said Dwayne's post was more like a tantrum and childish ridicule of his employer, rather than speech protected under Section 7 of the NLRA. In other words, this was not an attempt to stimulate discussion, but rather an anonymous one-way and one-time post. Here, Dwayne's posting on Glassdoor.com was not a social media posting like Facebook or Twitter. Instead, Glassdoor.com is a website used by respondent and prospective employees as a recruiting tool to recruit prospective employees. 37. The NLRB decision is an interesting step in the development of the law, as the NLRB tries to apply the NLRA's protections to employee use of social media. Dwayne has a pending Equal Employment Opportunity Commission lawsuit alleging employment discrimination under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Critical thinking. What ethical and legal obligations do employees have to refrain from badmouthing their employers in a fit of pique, especially on the firm's own website? Should management allow employees to criticize the company without fear of retaliation? Could management benefit from allowing such criticism? Why or why not? The rules related to social media are evolving, but applicable laws do not generally distinguish between sites or locations in which someone might criticize an employer, so criticism of the boss remains largely unprotected speech. As discussed earlier, employees can go online and post information about wages, hours, and working conditions, and that speech is protected by federal statute. So, although some general complaints against employers are not protected under the First Amendment, they may be protected under the NLRA, because arguably they may be related to terms and conditions of employment. However, most courts agree that statements personally critical of the boss or the company on a basis other than wages and working conditions are not protected. Obviously, there is no protection when employees post false or misleading information on social media in an attempt to harm the company's reputation or that of management. Whistleblowing, risks and rewards. The act of whistleblowing, going to an official government agency, and disclosing an employer's violation of the law is different from everyday criticism. In fact, whistleblowing is largely viewed as a public service because it helps society reduce bad workplace behavior. Being a whistleblower is not easy, however, and someone inclined to act as one should expect many hurdles. If a whistleblower's identity becomes known, his or her revelations may amount to career suicide. Even if they keep their job, whistleblowers often are not promoted, and they may face resentment not only from management but also from rank-and-file workers who fear the loss of their own jobs. Whistleblowers may also be blacklisted, making it difficult for them to get a job at a different firm, and all as a result of doing what is ethical. Blowing the whistle on your employer is thus a big decision with significant ramifications. However, most employees do not want to cover up unethical or illegal conduct, nor should they. When should employees decide to blow the whistle on their boss or company? Ethicists say it should be done with an appropriate motive, to get the company to comply with the law or to protect potential victims, and not to get revenge on a boss at whom you are angry. Of course, even if an employee has a personal revenge motive, if the company actively is breaking the law, it is still important that the wrongdoing be reported. In any case, knowing when and how to blow the whistle is a challenge for an employee wanting to do the right thing. The employee should usually try internal reporting channels first, to disclose the problem to management before going public. Sometimes workers mistakenly identify something as wrongdoing that was not wrongdoing after all. Internal reporting gives management a chance to start an investigation and attempt to rectify the situation. The employee who goes to the government should also have some kind of hard evidence that wrongful actions have occurred. The violation should be serious, and blowing the whistle should have some likelihood of stopping the wrongful act. Under many federal laws, an employer cannot retaliate by firing, demoting, or taking any other adverse action against workers who report injuries, concerns, or other protected activity. One of the first laws with a specific whistleblower protection provision was the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970. Since passage of that law, Congress has expanded whistleblower authority to protect workers who report violations of more than 20 different federal laws across various topics. There is no all-purpose whistleblower protection. It must be granted by individual statutes. A sample of the specific laws under which whistleblowing employees are protected can be found in the environmental area, where it is in the public interest for employees to report violations of the law to the authorities, which, in turn, helps the average citizen concerned about clean air and water. The Clean Air Act protects any employee reporting air emission violations from area, stationary, and mobile sources from any retaliation for such reporting. The Water Pollution Control Act similarly protects from retaliation any employee who reports alleged violations relating to discharge of pollutants into water. Without the help of employees who are on the ground and see the violations occur, it could be difficult for government regulators to always find the source of pollution. Even when whistleblowers are not acting completely altruistically, their revelations may still be true and worthy of being brought to the public's attention. Thus, in such situations, the responsible employee becomes a steward of the public interest, and we all should want whistleblowers to come forward. Yet not all whistleblowers are white knights, and not all their firms are evil dragons worthy of being slain. Link to learning. Go to this U.S. Department of Labor website that lists all the laws under which whistleblowers have protection to learn more. Blowing the whistle may bring the employee more than just intrinsic ethical rewards. It may also result in cash. The most lucrative law under which employees can blow the whistle is the False Claims Act, FCA, 31 U.S. See Section 3729, 3733. This legislation was enacted in 1863 during the American Civil War because Congress was worried that suppliers of goods to the Union Army might cheat the government. The FCA has been amended many times since then, and today it serves as a leading example of a statutory law that remains important after more than 150 years. The FCA provides that any person who knowingly submits false claims to the government must pay a civil penalty for each false claim, plus triple the amount of the government's damages. The amount of this basic civil penalty is regularly adjusted by the cost of living, and the current penalty range is from $5,500 to $11,000. More importantly for our discussion, the qui tam provision of the law allows private persons, called relators, to file lawsuits for violations of the FCA on behalf of the government and to receive part of any penalty imposed. The person bringing the action is a type of a whistleblower, but one who initiates legal action on his or her own rather than simply reporting it to a government agency. If the government believes it is a worthwhile case and intervenes in the lawsuit, then the relator whistleblower is entitled to receive between 15 and 25% of the amount the government recovers. If the government thinks winning is a long shot and declines to intervene in the lawsuit, the relator's share increases to 25 to 30%. A few whistleblowers have become rich and famous thanks to an ABC News story, with awards ranging in the neighborhood of $100 million. 38 in 2012, a single whistleblower, Bradley Birkenfeld, a former UBS employee, was awarded $104 million by the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, making him the most highly rewarded whistleblower in history. Birkenfeld also spent time in prison for participating in the tax fraud he reported. In 2009, 10 former Pfizer employees were awarded $102 million for exposing an illegal promotion of prescription medications. John Kopczynski, the original whistleblower and one of the 10, received $50 million. In another case involving the health care company HCA, 2 employees who blew the whistle on Medicare fraud ended up receiving a combined total of $100 million. It is not just the size of the reward that should get your attention, but also the amount of money these employees saved taxpayers and/or shareholders. They turned in companies that were cheating the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, affecting taxpayers, the IRS, affecting government revenues, and private health insurance, affecting premiums. The public saved far more than the reward paid to the whistleblowers. Incredibly high rewards such as the aforementioned are somewhat unusual, but according to National Whistleblower Center Director Stephen Cohn, Birkenfeld's and Eckerd's rewards act like advertisements for the U.S. government's whistleblower programs, which make hundreds of rewards every year. 39. The FCA is one of 4 laws under which whistleblowers can receive a reward. The others are administered by the IRS, the SEC, and the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. Most whistleblowers do not get paid until the lawsuit and all appeals have concluded, and the full amount of any monetary penalty has been paid to the government. Many complex cases of business fraud can go on for several years before a verdict is rendered and appealed, or a settlement is reached. An employee whose identity has been disclosed and who has been unofficially blacklisted may not see any reward money for several years. Cases from the real world. Sharon Watkins and Enron. Enron is one of the most infamous examples of corporate fraud in U.S. history. The scandal that destroyed the company resulted in approximately $60 billion in lost shareholder value. Sharon Watkins, an officer of the company, discovered the fraud and first went to her boss and mentor, founder and chairperson Ken Lay, to report the suspected accounting and financial irregularities. She was ignored more than once and eventually went to the press with her story. Because she did not go directly to the SEC, Watkins received no whistleblower protection. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act was not passed until after the Enron scandal. In fact, it was Watkins's circumstance and Enron's misdeeds that helped convince Congress to pass the law. 40. Now a respected national speaker on the topic of ethics and employees' responsibility, Watkins talks about how an employee should handle such situations. When you're faced with something that really matters, if you're silent, you're starting on the wrong path. Go against the crowd if need be, she said in a speech to the National Character and Leadership Symposium, a seminar to instill leadership and moral qualities in young men and women. Watkins talks openly about the risk of being an honest employee, something employees should consider when evaluating what they owe their company, the public, and themselves. I will never have a job in corporate America again. The minute you speak truth to power and you're not heard, your career is never the same again. Enron's corporate leaders dealt with the looming crisis by a combination of blaming others and leaving their employees to fend for themselves. According to Watkins, within 2 weeks of me finding this fraud, Enron president Jeff Skilling quit. We did feel like we were on a battleship, and things were not going well, and the captain had just taken a helicopter home. The fall of 2001 was just the bleakest time in my life, because everything I thought was secure was no longer secure. Critical thinking. Did Watkins owe an ethical duty to Enron, to its shareholders, or to the investing public to go public with her suspicions? Explain your answer. How big a price is it fair to ask a whistleblowing employee to pay? Link to learning. Visit the National Whistleblower Center website and learn more about some of the individuals discussed in this chapter who became whistleblowers. Watch this video about one of the most famous whistleblowers, Sharon Watkins, former vice president of Enron, to learn more. Sometimes employees, including managers, face an ethical dilemma that they seek to address from within rather than becoming a whistleblower. The risk is that they may be ignored or that their speaking up will be held against them. However, companies should want and expect employees to step forward and report wrongdoing to their superiors, and they should support that decision, not punish it. Sally Krawcheck, a financial industry executive, was not a whistleblower in either the classical or the legal sense. She went to her boss with her discovery of wrongdoing at work, which means she had no legal protection under whistleblower statutes. Read her story in the following box. Cases from the real world. Sally Krawcheck and Merrill Lynch. Shortly after Sally Krawcheck took over as chief of Merrill Lynch's wealth management division at Bank of America, she discovered that a mutual fund called the Stable Value Fund, a financial product Merrill had sold to customers as an investment for their 401(k) plans, was not as stable as its name implied. The team at Merrill had made a mistake by managing the fund in a way that assumed a higher risk than was acceptable to its investors, and the fund ended up losing much of its value. Unfortunately, because it was supposed to be a low-risk fund, the people who had invested in it and who would suffer most from Merrill's mistakes were earners of relatively modest incomes, including Walmart employees, who made up the largest group. According to Krawcheck, she had two options. Option one was to say tough luck to the Stable Value Fund's investors, including the Walmart employees, explaining that all investments carry some degree of risk. Option two was to bail out the investors by pouring money into the fund to increase its value. Krawcheck had already been burned once by trying to be ethical. She had been head of CD Group's wealth management division, Smith Barney. In that capacity, she had made a decision to reimburse clients for some of their losses she felt were due to company mistakes. Rather than supporting her decision, however, CD Group terminated her, in large part for making the ethical decision rather than the profitable one. Now she was in the same predicament with a new company. Should Krawcheck risk her job again by choosing the ethical act, or should she make a purely financial decision and tell the 401(k) investors they would have to take the loss? Krawcheck began talking to people inside and outside the company to see what they thought. Most told her to just keep her head down and do nothing. One industry titan told her there was nothing to be done, that everyone knows stable value funds are not really stable. Unconvinced, Krawcheck took the problem to Bank of America's CEO. He agreed to back her up and put company money into the depleted stable value funds to prop them up. Krawcheck opted to be honest and ethical by helping the small investors and felt good about it. "I thought ethical business was good business," she says. "It came down to my sense of purpose as well as my sense of my industry's purpose. It wasn't about some abstract ethical theorem. The answer wasn't that I got into the business simply to make a lot of money. It was because it was a business that I knew could have a positive impact on clients' lives." 41. But the story does not really have a happy ending. Krawcheck writes that she thought at the time she had done the right thing and still had her job, a win-win outcome of a very tough ethical dilemma. However, speaking out did come at a cost. Krawcheck lost some important and powerful allies within the company, and although she did not lose her job at that time, she writes, the political damage was done. "When that CEO retired, the clock began ticking down on my time at Bank of America, and before long I was reorganized out of that role." 42. Critical thinking. Could you do what Sally Krawcheck did and risk being fired a second time? Why or why not? Krawcheck went on to start her own firm, Elevest, specializing in investments for female clients. Why do you think she chose this route rather than moving to another large Wall Street firm? What would you do? Underestimating and overcharging. Suppose you are a supervising engineer at a small defense contractor of about 100 employees. Your firm had barely been breaking even, but the recent award of a federal contract has dramatically turned the situation around. Midway through the new project, though, You realize that the principal partners in your firm have been overcharging the Department of Defense for services provided and components purchased. You discovered this accidentally, and it would be difficult for anyone else to find it out. You take this information to one of the principals, whom you know well and respect. He tells you apologetically that the overcharges became necessary when the firm seriously underestimated total project costs in its bid on the contract. If the overcharges do not continue, the firm will again be perilously close to bankruptcy. You know the firm has long struggled to remain financially viable. Furthermore, you have great confidence in the quality of the work your team is providing the government. Finally, you feel a special kinship with nearly all the employees and particularly with the founding partners, so you are loath to take your evidence to the government. Critical thinking. What are you going to do? Will you swallow your discomfort because making the overcharges public may very well put your job and those of 100 friends and colleagues at risk? Would the overall quality of the firm's work on the contract persuade you it is worth what it is charging? Or would you decide that fraud is never permissible, even if its disclosure comes at the cost of the survivability of the firm and the friendships you have within it? Explain your reasoning.